Hey, kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to a brand new edition of Big Hairy News on your Tuesday with George. Hey, George, it is Tuesday, eh? I get so confused with days off.
It is.
It is
Tuesday.
It is Tuesday.
When the week should begin.
When the week should begin. I'd like to do it. I've always liked working kind of 3 on, 4 off, or 4 on, 3 off. I did that for a while, actually. Working in radio, worked 4 days a week. It was really nice. I always have a 3-day weekend. I would be about, in general, speaking of, because Labor Day, 8 hours sleep, 8 hours work, 8 hours playing 8 bob a day. Is that the old poem? I would be about working 10 hours a day, 4 days a week. Like if you had to do a 40-hour week, if that was the role you're in, I'd completely be up for 10 hours a day, 4 days a week. I think that's a great way to be able to operate and get your work done. Anyway, how are you, sir?
Yeah, no, good. Seen a good. Seen some. Just watched "Don't Worry, Darling," the Olivia Wilde film.
Oh yeah.
Which was sort of a classic. Sort of Plato's cave, like finding out your reality isn't what it seems, sort of movie.
Right.
Yeah. Other than that, Labor weekend was just sorting out the house because we're going to move. So didn't really have a 3-day weekend, but that's all good.
I tell you something I watched the other day on Netflix, The Dry. I quite enjoyed it. The Dry. It's a good one.
Okay.
It's a Netflix film. I quite enjoyed it. In fact, we started having a look every now and again when we're going, what should we watch tonight? You get out the old Rotten Tomatoes and you look what's going on and what's good and what's not. And we've got a list of things. And what else do we watch in the weekend? We watched something. I watched The Batman finally in the weekend. Have you seen The Batman, the new one with the dude from Twilight? I finally watched that in the weekend. I was I like his Batman performance. Like I like him as Batman. But every time I looked at this guy with the fringe kind of hanging down in front of his face, like all I could see was, I've never seen Twilight, but all I could see was teenage vampire. So I couldn't see this kind of Bruce Wayne thing. But it was an interesting version of Bruce Wayne, the tormented soul that he was in this film. And I did like the version of him when he had the cowl on, when he was actually Batman as well. It's going to be interesting to see.
Robert Pattinson's definitely growing out of his sort of Twilight thing. He's done some great little indie movies as well, some indie movies as well, by the Safdie brothers. I can't remember the name of it now, but anyway, like I guess I understand what they're sort of going for there, the sort of in his basement on his computers, a bit of an emo Batman.
Yeah, I also I'm just trying to think of the name of it. I watched another one in the weekend as well because we had a bit of a it was a great weather in Dunedin over the weekend. But there was a film and I'm just trying to struggle to remember the name of it, but it's by the makers of Little Miss Sunshine, and it was that kind of sort of comedy, heartstring tugging. I'll find it while we're going through the show, but it was from people who made Little Miss Sunshine. It was really cool, actually. It was really a good flick. We've got another one, the Banshee of the something or other, which I'm looking forward to seeing Colin Firth in it, and he plays a Irish character. And the storyline, I haven't seen it yet, but I'm looking forward to seeing it. The storyline is something along the lines of there's a guy who plays the fiddle or the violin, and the guy who plays the violin says to Colin Firth's character, if you ever talk to me again, every time you talk to me, I'm going to cut one of my fingers off. So of course the whole village doesn't want him to talk to him because he's a fantastic fiddle player or violin player. So yeah, that looks interesting. If anyone in the chat right now, and hello to everybody, can think of, it's on Netflix at the moment, it will come to me, but the film made by Little Miss Sunshine producers, that's on Netflix at the moment, because it was really good, but I just can't think of it. I'm not very good with names of movies. Like people are like, have you seen such and such? I'm like, and then they say the plot, and I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen that. I'll think of it. I'll think of it as we
Good Times was the Safdie brothers I was thinking of for all those Robert Pattinson fans in the chat. Good Times, the Safdie brothers, great directors. They did that recent one, Uncut Gems, with Adam Sandler.
Yeah, Uncut Gems was good. You're right.
Speaking of Netflix, Aussie crime thriller with two of my favorite actors, Joel Edgerton and Sean Harris, called The Stranger. That's on Netflix.
Yeah, I've heard good things about that, actually.
Yeah, Aussies are very good at that sort of dark crime, gritty stuff.
Yeah, well, the Dry is a little bit like that. It's a little bit like that. It's about a guy who comes. It's what's his name? Who played the Hulk, and he's in Chopper. That guy, that actor, Eric Banner. He plays kind of a police officer who leaves a small town, and then he comes back to the small town to help solve a crime that happened 20 years ago that he was sort of implicated in. But it's that kind of gritty, hard story, and it's good. It's actually good. I'd recommend The Dry to anybody if they want to check it out. Anyway,
the other thing, awesome. That's a great movie.
It is a fucking awesome movie, eh? Yeah. The other thing that was cool over the weekend is we had our first sort of Patreon catch up. And had a half dozen people there or so catching up on Saturday morning. It was really, really good. And I've just messaged everybody saying, sorry, I cocked up, guys. My recording didn't work, so we did it on Zoom. So if anyone out there was watching it and anyone recorded it locally, let me know, and you can send me a copy and I'll upload it on Patreon as well. But I've decided to be bold a little bit, George. We've currently got 23 patrons, and I'm going to set a target of 50 patrons by Christmas. So that's going to be our target for the year, trying to get to 50 patrons by Christmas. If you're interested in supporting the work we do, then you can head to patreon.com/Big Hairy News, and you can be a patron for as little as $5 a month, and the most is $250. And there are various, obviously, benefits the higher the level you go up, including caps and t-shirts and merch and all that kind of stuff as well. So get involved at patreon.com/Big Hairy News. Okay. Let's get into this, shall we? Because we had a conversation. Well, I guess it's almost 20 working days ago, because I had a conversation with Newstalk ZB about an issue that happened on Newstalk ZB to do with their afternoon host Heather du Plessis-Allan, and how Heather du Plessis-Allan treated a young guest that they had on. The young guest's name was Izzy Cook, and Izzy Cook was I don't call her a climate activist. She's a 16-year-old who's working in the field of climate. She's stretching her activist legs, stretching those muscles as a 16-year-old, and trying on some stuff and trying out some stuff. And though the school strike of climate change is one of the organizers of that, and so she went on Newstalk ZB, and in my opinion, as a former broadcaster at Newstalk ZB and a person who's worked in news talk and current affairs radio for a very long time, I thought got treated abysmally. I'm going to replay a little bit of the phone call, and I know that you guys who are watching have heard this all before, probably because I've played it before, but I think it's important just for those who haven't heard it, or to reorientate ourselves with the reason that I thought that this was an appalling piece of radio. I'm not going to play the whole thing. I'm just going to play the famous part, which is when Izzy Cook was talking to Heather du Plessis-Allan, and Heather du Plessis-Allan outed her, caught her in an apparent hypocrisy about going to Fiji when she shouldn't go to Fiji. Now, before I play this, I want to say one thing, because I put up on my Facebook page today that we were going to talk about this, and it's had quite a lot of response. One of the things I want to read is this before I go to it, if I can actually freaking find it. Is this, right? This is a person on my Facebook page. I'm just reading it off my phone, so I won't bring it up on the screen. It says, I heard that interview live and must say that we have to stop treating children and teenagers as protected species. Heather spoke the truth and asked for the truth and stuck to her journalistic instincts, a true professional and highly respected orator. That was one of the responses I got. Now, let me be clear before I play this. At no point have I said, or do I think, that actually finding a hole in someone's argument, in this case, the issue around going to Fiji and telling others that that's not the best idea, is not appropriate to call out at no stage. What my call or my position the whole way was how Heather du Plessis-Allan treated this 16-year-old. I don't give a flying fuck if people are going, well, she's playing in the big boys and girls area now, so she can be treated like that, because that's not even a good argument. Because if you think that's the case here, if you think she was treated like everybody else, then find me another conversation where Heather du Plessis-Allan treats any guest on her show like this. And I would bet that you'll struggle to find it, because it doesn't happen, because this is an anomaly. This is actually outside the realms of norm. This is not how Heather du Plessis-Allan would treat an adult, to which I think, in my opinion, that one of the reasons that Heather du Plessis-Allan treated Izzy like this was because she was 16. So make that clear. It's not about calling out the hole in the argument. It's about how it was called out and how this guest on your show was treated. Now I'll play that piece and you can have a listen to it.
Am I allowed to go to Fiji? Is that necessary?
In the current climate crisis, I don't think that that's necessary.
When was the last time you were on a plane?
I'm not sure. Maybe a few months ago, to be honest.
Where'd you go?
Fiji.
Izzy! Izzy! Don't you care about the climate, Izzy?
Of course I care about the climate.
Not enough. You went to... you went to Fiji. Izzy, come on, mate. Are you serious? Are you serious, Izzy?
No, it's pretty
Are you still there?
It is pretty ironic, but to be honest, it's not really a trip that I wanted to go on, but I can't really get out of it.
Why'd you go? Why'd you go?
My parents wanted to go.
Izzy,
I didn't want to go.
How are you embarrassed that your parents did that to the planet and then forced you to do it as well?
Of course I'm not embarrassed.
Did you have a terrible time?
Not really. I didn't have to do anything.
See, I'm sorry, mate. Listen, you're such a champion. I think you've got a brilliant future ahead of you. And are you doing another strike soon?
Yeah, well, we'll look to.
Good. We'll talk to you again and might get you back on the show. Izzy Cook, who's a school strike for climate Wellington organiser. Anyway, Rod Orham's going to be with us on a similar subject soon, 6:12.
So, George, there's the part of the conversation. Now, you've worked at university working with people studying journalism. I think the last time I talked about this, I was talking with Chewy. I don't know if you and I have actually talked about this on this show. Do you want to speak to that at all before we kind of go into what happened today?
I've read some of the other parts of the interview, and I guess it's par for the course with this sort of combative environment that Izzy was in, and the combative interviews that the host definitely wants to happen, right? That sort of based around that. But they're reading the transcript of even the earlier interview as well. There's not much of a journalistic conversation going on, it seems, right? It's very Heather is not taking the points seriously on purpose, taking things very literally, or whatever it might be and that's not even really about the Fiji stuff. She's asking, what, are we just going to kill half the cows? It's completely ridiculous stuff. So she was already sort of coming from this bullshitting ridiculous angle.
Now, I'll be really honest with you here. This has had a huge amount, like the idea in the internet world of being ratioed. The idea of being ratioed is when basically you put out an opinion and the counter opinion dwarfs it. This has been ratioed left, right, and center. Like if you have a look at the clip, the last time we talked about this, it's like a 90% dislike rate. And the comments in it are just all, let's say 90% supportive of the way that Heather du Plessis-Allan treated Izzy. And whilst I'm not surprised by that, because the internet is a cesspool of a river of filth of people in a lot of instances. I am disappointed in it. Now, here's one of the reasons, and I've already said this once in the last 6 months. I'll say it again. It's not about saying to a teenager, "Hey, dude, that's really contradictory." It's about basically going, "You fucking idiot. What are you doing coming on my show? You fucking idiot." I'm paraphrasing, obviously, because that's how, for me, it comes across.
Yeah. That's the reason I sort of, even after hearing that a few times, like when I first hear her reaction, that's why she makes me laugh in a way, in her excitedness, because you know that the host is excited because she has fulfilled her purpose in this situation, to take the piss.
Yeah. And look, I know a lot of behind the scenes from ZB from my days there. It hasn't been there for a decade, so it's old news from my personal experience. But I have to tell you, I've heard from more than one person who works in the Newstalk ZB building right now who have thanked me for addressing this to Newstalk ZB. I've had people say things to me like Newstalk ZB. These are people who are working in that building now. I don't want to identify exactly where they're working, but in that building now, saying things like ZB has lost its moral compass. I've had other people talking to me about the team around Heather du Plessis-Allan is made up of young people who idolize her. So she's surrounded by I don't know if they're male or female, so yes, men and women. And there's no pushback at all. And the management at Newstalk ZB loves Heather du Plessis-Allan. So this is the feedback that I'm getting from my sources, I guess you'd have to call them, because I'm not going to identify them, but they are people who work in there at the moment, that there is no restrictions at the moment. So this is all information given to me before the inquiry that I made got a response, which actually leads to the response being, I think, a bit more interesting, actually, that's the case. So in other words, there's no one, as I'm told, there's no one in Heather du Plessis-Allan's team who pushed back against her. I spoke to an incredibly highly leveled radio manager when I was in Auckland a couple of weeks ago. I won't identify who they are, where they're from, what group they're in, anything like that, even if they're still in there now, who has worked in those fields before, who said it was a terrible idea executed poorly. And I think that's like meaning what she did, to ridicule and mock her, a terrible idea executed poorly. And I think I actually think that's kind of being sort of generous. I just think she was a cunt. That's what I think, and I think that's, maybe we're on the internet, so we don't have to mince our words a bit more. And that actually, if anyone defends Heather du Plessis-Allan's style, I would challenge you to put your own 16-year-old there and be spoken to like that, and see if you'd be thinking the same thing. Again, it's not about not calling out a 16-year-old who's got holes in their argument, right? And I've said this before. Imagine a 16-year-old in 1981 being interviewed, and let's say it was School Action against the Springbok tour, being interviewed like that on the radio then, who were saying, I just want Nelson Mandela to be freed out of prison, out of Robben Island. That's what I'm here for. Doesn't have to have all the answers as a 16-year-old. Is just trying things on for size, and I don't mean that to be dismissive, and actually should be encouraged in what they're doing. This kid will probably be one of the leaders in 10, 15, 20 years from now in the country. Not necessarily saying she'll have the same position she's got now either, because this is what people do. They start to investigate their political chops and what they believe, and that evolves. And 30, 40 years later, who knows? They're in the cabinet in Parliament. So I just think it's overall repulsive and repugnant. But anyway,
the Fiji thing itself, is obviously ironic, but it's also ironic because she, a big part of the youth climate action is talking about how they feel that the kids feel powerless because the adults of the world are doing these things to the planet. So it was ironic that she was saying that she went on holiday with her family. She doesn't make the decisions in her family. But yeah, that's actually getting into the whole argument of the thing. I think if you just read the transcript of this interview, if you think that the host is in the right with this sort of journalism or whatever it is, then I don't know what to say, because she just comes across like a fucking witch lady, right? That is there to embarrass, there to not listen at all, there to mock climate action or whatever for her listeners and, for the powers that be as well.
Yeah. All right. Let's have a look. So I've never done this before. Like, just so it's clear, for someone who, whatever sort of field you're working in, you imagine making a significant complaint against some entity within the field you're working in. So I've never done this before. I've never made a complaint or anything, but I think I said this previously, and it's a little bit of my own probably counseling coming out here. I feel like Heather du Plessis-Allan took this medium that I love so much, talk radio, and basically abused it. Did the worst possible thing you could do to it, because she treated it like it was utterly worthless and did the worst kind of thing you could do with it. So I acknowledge that there's probably some of my own sort of, what the fuck are you doing to this thing I love in this, right? I get that. But overall, I just thought that there were so many clear issues of broadcasting standards being breached within that I wrote to ZB, and I've heard back from ZB today, and that's what we're going to share now. So let's have a look at the response that's come back from ZB. Now, I because I don't, to be honest with you, it sounds really naive. I don't really know how Broadcasting Standards Authority works. So I found some areas that I thought this kind of fitted into. So they've responded to the areas that I found that it fitted into, which were discrimination and denigration. I don't actually think it was discrimination, but I do think it was denigration, and fairness were two of the areas that I picked out. The response we got from ZB, and it was interesting to hear that when I tweeted this out today, some people tweeted back at me, yeah, I got a response today as well. So I certainly wasn't the only person that made noise about this. And if you were one of those people who did, be interested to hear what your response was like as well. So we got a full transcript of the as George said, the actual interview. The whole thing was typed out word for word. I feel sorry for the person who had to do this, but there you go. And then we got to the end of the conversation, and I only heard up to this bit here where she wrapped up as we heard you. I didn't hear this previously, but they've actually transcribed what happened after the interview as well. Heather du Plessis-Allan went to the text messages and saying the text messages are divided. She said, tell her she's dreaming, LOL, Fiji for the win. Heather, you're joking. Izzy is a hypocrite, great interview. Ha ha ha, says someone, I cannot. She went to Fiji. I had to pull over. I was laughing so hard. She went super quiet. LOL, LOL, LOL. This is gold, Heather. I'm laughing out loud, says another. Heather, please stop. My sides are aching with laughter. I know I've wet my pants. So those were some of the text messages that were coming in. And then she said, now, obviously, you can tell from my reaction, I'm on that side. And I thought it was funny that this is what's happening. On the other side of the text, along these lines, Heather, that was very mean. Heather, how embarrassing. Why would you treat a young lady like that? Heather, you shouldn't bring people on your show and then bully them. Shame on you. There was no need to treat the girl like the way you did. And I'm disgusted. So she read out, 6 or 7 texts supporting her position and 3 not supporting her positions. I didn't hear that audio, but that's what it is there. Then Heather du Plessis-Allan said this. This has been transcribed for me from ZB. Now, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to Izzy. That was not your best experience she's ever had. However, this was not my fault. It was Izzy's fault, because Izzy told you you're not allowed to go to Fiji, but then Izzy got snapped going to Fiji. Now, I did not expect that Izzy went to Fiji, right? I didn't know that. Side note, I don't believe that for a second. I don't believe for a second that Heather du Plessis-Allan did not know that. It is my honest held belief that that is bullshit. My honest held belief is that they knew that and that they had looked on Izzy's Instagram, which had photos of Fiji, which is what Izzy's mother claimed. Now, that's an opinion. I don't know that for a fact, but I think if you take Occam's razor, which is the fewest number of assumptions to get to a conclusion, did she just happen to pick out Fiji out of the blue for no real random reason, or did she know? Yeah. I think the most likely solution is she knew. So I don't believe that at all. Sorry, you going to say something?
Yeah, just want to. I noticed this as well. Air travel wasn't mentioned until the host brought it up.
Yeah,
they were talking about cows and shit.
Yeah, literal shit and shit. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't believe that, right? So I'm calling bullshit. Now, I could be wrong. It's an opinion, but I'm calling bullshit that she didn't know. I think she said that for another thing later on, which I'll bring up. She says, I didn't know. I was just asking a question, and that happened to all of a sudden. I saw the protest in a completely different light. She goes on to say this: these young people want to be able to vote at 16. Do they though? They want to be able to influence what we are doing. If they want to be treated like adults, they're going to face some adult questions. And that is what just happened. Izzy, if you're listening, we really like you, patronizing, and we'll have you back on the show again. You're a top-notch person. Don't go to Fiji, Izzy. You're hurting the climate. Mocking at the end there. Now, the thing that's horseshit about this is this is not how you treat adults. This is the thing that I'm saying that people have, in my opinion, missed completely. She got treated like an adult. No, she didn't. She got treated like dog crap on the sole of Heather du Plessis-Allan's shoe. Show me another interview where Heather du Plessis-Allan does that to anybody. It doesn't happen. Why? Because that's not how you treat anybody. That's not how you treat adults or 16-year-olds. So I think that there's this narrative going around going, you know, this 16-year-old wants to play with the big boys and girls and she's going to be treated. That's not how people get treated in the real world at all.
It's interesting that I've seen a pattern with like I guess random videos of like culture war stuff where adults will constantly be trying to debate children. It's and you know, basically like, you know, well, I mean, it's like the classic, you know, right wingers on campus owning first year students, you know, totally destroying them with facts and logic. It's like, of course you are, you know, that of course you can track them in some contradiction or whatever. Yeah. Congratulations, you owned a kid. There was a great example of this recently with a school mural in the States that some parent association people thought was like satanic or pro-trans or something like this. And there's footage of them in a PTA meeting where they're getting up and just like berating this child and talking about how to, you know, basically debating a child about a mural. There's a total pattern in this culture war stuff where adults seem to really get into trying to debate kids.
Yeah. And I think you're right. The culture wars thing. I mean, I'm straight away, I think about the Stephen Crowder, you know, going out to universities and debating 17-year-olds on topics that, and again, you know, 17, 18, 19-year-old at university, obviously a lot more advanced than a 16-year-old at school, has different thought process, has different developed brain, you know, more adult-like, if not adults in general, but facing off against a, you know, 40-year-old who works in broadcasting, whose job is to communicate, who is there to fuck with them, who has all the resources up his sleeve. It's a different bag. It's a different bag. Anyway, so the complaint response comes back and it goes on to talk about denigration. Now, look, the broadcasting standards does talk about denigration and discrimination being against a group of people. So therefore, they've said straight away that this doesn't apply here because this is only an individual. Now, I mean, this, look, I'll say it bluntly, this might be a long bow, yeah. But I feel like the way, in my opinion, she was treated this way because she was a teenager. Now, does that mean that she was denigrated as an individual, or she was denigrated because she was a part of the teenage people group? Maybe a long bow. Be interesting to see what the BSA does say about that. But if we get on, so in other words, it says right here on that. So this is ZB responding, right? ZB does not uphold the complaint in respect of those things. So they get to decide if it's upheld or not at this stage. And they're saying, no, that's not upheld. Going on to fairness, okay? The community, this commentary is to, the commentary to the standard notes that, quote, the purpose of the standard is to protect the dignity and reputation of those featured in the programs, right? So fairness is being fair to people, to protect their dignity and to protect their reputation. Guidelines go on, 8.1, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it says here, a consideration of what is fair and the threshold for finding unfairness to an individual or organization, so this is the individual here, may take into account the following factors, and there's a bunch of them there that don't apply so much, and this one there, the nature of the individual or organization. So in other words, it's a teenager from school, yeah? So it's not, as it says here, a public figure or a politician, et cetera, it's a teenager. Right, so that's the nature of the person. Whether the program would have left the audience with an unfairly negative impression of the individual. Well, I can tell you from the feedback we've got, the audience has been left with an unfairly negative impression of this individual, without question. Whether any critical comments were aimed at the participant, and I've highlighted of their personal life, because they're not a business person and they're not a professional. And I can tell you again, we've seen the comments that there are a lot of critical comments aimed at them purely because of this conversation. Also talks about the vulnerability of the individual. And I would say to you that a 16-year-old is far more vulnerable than a 40 or 50-year-old politician, in my opinion, when it comes to communicating and understanding how media works. Participants and contributors should be informed before a broadcast of the nature of the program and their proposed contribution, except where justified in the public interest or where their participation is minor in the context of the program. Now, when Heather du Plessis-Allan said she didn't know, I suspect, I have an opinion, I have a wondering, let's take even one step away from opinion, that because they did basically trap her and do a gotcha question, if they admitted that they knew beforehand, then this participant wasn't informed before the broadcast of what was going to happen. So I think they have to say that we didn't know, but I don't believe that. That's my personal view, though. And in this one here, individuals, and particularly children and young people featured in a program should not be exploited, humiliated, or unfairly identified. So I've got some more to read out there, though, George, but what do you think so far on what we've just said there with those BSAs?
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe you wanted to talk about the process of doing this a bit later on, but I was surprised by the comprehensiveness of the standards themselves. The informing of the nature of the interview is an interesting one as well, considering that, you know, I doubt that the interviewee was told of how combative this interview would be, right?
Yeah.
Because I feel like she was underprepared for that nature of the interview.
And what we haven't showed tonight, George, but I showed when we did this previously, is this was the second interview that Izzy had done with Heather du Plessis-Allan. And the first one was all sunshine and moonbeams and all that kind of stuff and lovey-dovey and happy and that. So Izzy would have come back on without any idea of the pylon that was about to happen. In fact, when I read the story that her mother wrote, that Izzy's mother wrote, her mother wasn't even aware the conversation was going on. So obviously either ZB had phoned Izzy or Izzy had phoned ZB to do the conversation without even checking with her mum. And I suspect a part to play with that might be, pardon me, it might be that the previous time they talked was fantastic and caring and kind and happy and that, and then this happened. So let's finish up, because this is the end of it, where there is the ZB does uphold a complaint. It said the host's reaction to Ms. Cook's admission that she had recently travelled to Fiji by airplane was born out of a genuine surprise and shock. Don't believe that for a second. As I say, Occam's razor. The host did not know about Ms. Cook's recent air travel when she had asked this question, as host noted in the segment that followed. Don't believe that at all. Honest held belief. This was not a situation where the host had used information sourced beforehand. Well, maybe that's true, because as where was the comment? As Free Soul said, as the host noted in the segment, where the host had used information sourced beforehand to challenge an interviewee. Maybe the host didn't source that information. Maybe a producer is. So maybe there's a little bit of hair splitting going on there. As Free Soul says, producers will research everything, especially social media. It's their job. So it hadn't been sourced beforehand to challenge an interviewee on air, or an example of a gotcha journalism. Instead, the host was seeking to establish whether Ms. Cook, and as organizer and spokesperson for the School Strike for Climate Action Group, was adhering to the 6 demands published by the group she represented. Importantly, the host also apologized to Ms. Cook. Did you get that apology that we read out earlier, where she was laughing, saying, "I'm so sorry"? In the segment that followed for her reaction, we also reject the claim that the host's treatment of Ms. Cook was amounted to bullying. So they reject that claim. Now, this is really important, right? This is the upholding of the complaint, but the paragraph one before the upholding of the complaint says this: finally, we note the host's point that, quote, these young people want to be able to vote at 16. They want to be able to influence what we are doing. If they want to be treated like adults, they're going to face some adult questions, right? So you've got that. So ZB is saying, fair enough. It was all fair. Questions were fair. She wants to play the adult games, play the adult games. The next paragraph, notwithstanding the above, In view of Ms. Cook's age and potential vulnerability, having regard to the above guidelines, both the host and Newstalk ZB acknowledge the embarrassment that the segment may have caused Ms. Cook, and we uphold your complaint under Section 8. We apologise to Ms. Cook for any harm this may have caused her. So basically, right, this is 2,200 words. Basically, 2,150 of those words are like, sweet as, everything was done was fine. It was above board, no problems. It's all good. Literally up until the paragraph before they said, oh, yeah, but we uphold the complaint. And then they say we uphold the complaint, acknowledging that she wasn't treated fairly. So that's ZB saying that. We uphold your complaint under Section 8. So in other words, all the stuff explaining why Section 8 was okay, right? All the stuff that I'm scrolling through now, if you're watching, all the stuff that says why it's okay, then at the end they say it wasn't okay. George?
Yeah, the process thing that I mentioned before. This is an interesting practice that I wasn't familiar of where an organisation that is meant to uphold these standards looks at these complaints, cross-referencing it with the standards, and then makes a decision on whether they themselves upheld those standards or not, right? And you're explaining to me off air that this is a required step before the BSA, or not?
Yeah, you got to approach the radio or the broadcaster first. They have 20 days to respond, which is ironically, I think, in 1 day from now. And then if you're not satisfied, I mean, I didn't show it because I've stripped some of the personal stuff off of this, like emails and that. But the very next page, which I didn't show you, says, should you be dissatisfied with this decision, you have the right to take the matter to the Broadcasting Standards Authority within 20 working days. So that's the next thing to do if one were to want to do it. And I'm undecided on that yet. But I also think when the thing said we apologize to Izzy, well, how are they actually going to contact Izzy and apologize? Because like Rose says, so Pat, are you leading up to them reading out a flabby apology at 1:30 a.m. on a Monday morning? What happens there? Now, I acknowledge the BSA is a toothless monster because there's nothing they can do. It's not like they can fine them, $10,000 for an offence if there was one. It's a self-regulatory body. But as you can see with that step one, basically ZB goes, no, nothing to see here. They get to decide themselves whether the complaint was upheld. It's the exact definition of, like the police investigating themselves, although we're not talking crimes here, but you know what I mean? It's like when you self-regulate to start with and then the industry regulates. I don't know. It's just like, I like not being a part of the broadcasting standards doing internet stuff, but there's times in the past, and there's been times with various, broadcasters that we've talked about here where I go, God, if only there was a Broadcasting Standards Authority to hold these people at least to some level of accountability. It doesn't really do that, but that's where we're at right now with this.
It's like a sort of good reference to say, these are the ideals of our society. We've written them down. Let's use those as the referent of, the ideal thing if we were to ever get there. I think the reason that this story wasn't big on my radar, but I think it's good in sort of highlighting, because I don't particularly, I'm not going to go on some personal crusade for Izzy. It's more a reflection of what Newstalk ZB will be doing every day, right? It's part of their nature. It's part of the host's nature, particularly to set up interviews like this, but all the laughing Fiji stuff aside, I encourage people to look through a transcript of that interview and tell me that we shouldn't care that is supposedly journalism.
Yeah. The last thing to say, and this is from personal experience. Now, remember, my experience of ZB is 10 years ago, so things may have changed, but I know without question that in the past, and the management that told me this then are no longer there, so they may have a new policy of doing it, but certainly there was a policy of never admitting fault. when I was there. And I know because I got involved in a situation where I did something silly on air. I made a joke on air actually about giving away $1 million. I had some Zimbabwean dollars and I made a joke about giving away $1 million. And every time I said it, I'd say conditions apply, because the conditions were there. They are dollars, but they're Zimbabwean dollars. And then the person who won the prize, had a go at ZB for $1 million, which obviously was never going to happen. But I got told in those meetings that that I was to never admit fault, and that ZB would never admit fault, because as soon as you admit fault, you admit culpability. And so I wonder, although broadcasting standards don't really have any, recourse for culpability other than maybe a bit of a black eye, I see it in this kind of conversation. To be honest, if I was the manager and I'd heard that, but then again, I've probably got a different perspective on, what good broadcasting means today. If I'm sounding a bit arrogant, I would have had the fucking host over the coals for that conversation, and 1,000 times. And like I said, I'll say it again, speaking to incredibly high management radio people, won't identify where they're from, what group they're from, whether they're still active or not. When I was in Auckland 2 weeks ago, the overarching theme was a bad idea poorly executed. And so to come back basically saying there's nothing to see here, there's nothing wrong, when people within the building were shocked by it, because I've heard from them, people outside of the building were shocked by it. It feels like maybe ZB's kind of just, if we just don't acknowledge it, it'll go away. Not a big deal. But even if it doesn't go away, there's not really much that can actually happen. It's not like it's a defamation or anything. So I just think it's revolting and disgusting, and complete bastardization of a medium that is sometimes can be quite beautiful. And in this instance, having just watched the Batman over the weekend, this is what my takeaway from it was.
You went to Fiji.
Right.
Are you serious? Are you serious, Izzy?
I didn't have to.
We'll talk to you again and might get you back on the show.
And with that, I'm kind of done with that. George, is there any comments you want to throw out there?
That's a nice comparison. I hadn't thought of that. There were some things in chat that I could respond to, but I think my thinking is sort of just summed up by this comment here, because there was talk of offence and snowflakes, and it's none of our business, which is just a very bizarre.
None of our business. Those of us who comment on the media permanent as a job, those of us who comment on the commentators, that's what our job description is. It's none of our business. Is that what people are saying?
Don't complain. It's like, well, why, as a society, should we come up with all these standards? And like, if you went through life thinking like that, like, horrible shit would happen around you, and you'd be like, "Yep, this is sweet as." It's less about being offended for the girl, Izzy, and it's more about holding the ZB to proper journalistic standards, as from Serious NZ there.
And look, I'll say it for a third time, just to make sure you fucking people who can't sit the right way on a toilet seat are really clear. It's not about telling a 16-year-old that they've got holes in their argument, which is basically what's being said. It's about basically getting someone on your show, treating them like a pile of shit, embarrassing them on purpose. I believe doing research beforehand to set them up, and then, breaking every broadcasting standard in the sun because of it. It's actually, for me, a stylistic, and I guess what you've just read, George, a journalistic critique of ZB, and they need to pull their socks up. That's really what it's about. And whilst I am defending Izzy, but that's more, it could have been anybody. That's more the byproduct than the focal point. The focal point is that how Izzy, person X, in this case Izzy, was treated by this group of professional journalistic adults. That's what it is to me. Right. Thank you, guys. We appreciate the feedback in there as well. Let's have a look at this other story that's been bubbling around for a couple of days now. A couple of days ago, I think it was in the weekend, Claire Trevette. I'm going to go Trevette. Do you know George Trevette? Trevette? Trevet, French, has been talking about this idea. In fact, lots of people have been talking about this idea of the Prime Minister stepping down. Now, this was on the 22nd, so this was 3 days ago. Nala, shh, lie down. And the position that the journalist Claire Trevet from New Zealand Herald made was it's not happening. I think when Chewy's been on, he's been talking about he reckons his dollar is on Luxon going before the election. I don't think that's going to happen. I can't imagine the Prime Minister stepping down either. But just to scroll to a bit of this and talk about why this journalist was saying that the Prime Minister won't be stepping down, and then we'll get to what some other people are saying about this. Right. So Claire says, there appears to be two theories behind this. First is that Ardern has lost her appetite for the job. The second, that her popularity is dropping, so she might do an Andrew Little and hand over to someone else who might have a better chance. The flaw in the second theory is there's nobody else who might have a better chance. Little had Ardern, who was already outpolling him in the preferred Prime Minister rankings. There is no Ardern for Ardern, and Ardern remains well above Luxon as preferred Prime Minister. As for the first, Ardern showed in the past week she still has fight left in her. Question Time delivered the first showing of more fiery Ardern we can expect to see more of as she fights her corner into the lead up to the election. She delivered a blistering response to Luxon's questioning about Labour's spending and inflation, aiming squarely at the cost of Luxon's tax cut policies. In particular, the lack of detail around where the cuts would be made to pay for them. That is a question Luxon does not intend to answer until much closer to the election, and so it is a question that Labour will continue to hammer at. National is relying on voters seeing only the broad brushstrokes of its tax cut policies and trusting it when it says there is enough waste in government spending to be able to fund tax cuts without pruning into critical public services. But at some point, the detail will have to come. If there is any doubt about that, National should remember how devastating Sir John Key's 2011 "Show me the money" line was to the credibility of Labour's campaign. Ardern has also tightened up the messaging around the Three Waters reforms to focus squarely on the hip pockets of voters. Her only response now to questions about the unpopular reforms is to repeatedly point out that if they pull the pin on the reforms, ratepayers will see their rates go up. So this is a conversation where Claire Trevet is setting out the idea that there is no way that Ardern is going anywhere. However, there is also quite a lot of information floating around at the moment talking about is the speculation that Jacinda Ardern is about to quit. This is Bryce Edwards from Victoria University. Bryce Edwards says, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern flies to Antarctica today, and her media spin doctors will be hoping for some good photo opportunities to lift the leader's popularity, but they will be asking a lot. Tomorrow it will be 5 years since Ardern was sworn in as Prime Minister. At that time, she was incredibly popular, and her support kept rising, hitting its heights in 2020. That tide has certainly turned in recent months, and there are signs that Ardern is heading for a very difficult time as Prime Minister in the near future. Economic and social factors may get much worse, and the prospect of Labour's popularity declining further is possible, especially as difficult reforms throw up problems. Re-election in 2023 has never seemed more in doubt. Unsurprisingly, there has been an upswing in speculation about how long Ardern will stay on as leader and Prime Minister. The idea of her stepping down before next election is gaining traction, despite there being no obvious candidate in the Labour Party who would do a better job than her. And I think I brought up here.
I love it when, I love it.
Yeah.
And you know, Bryce Edwards he's all right by me, but I love it when commentators say, well, basically they say the Trump line, they say many people are saying.
Yeah, but actually in this instance, quite a few people are saying. We've got a couple of commentators coming up as well. But on the point of who would replace her, honestly, without sounding too disrespectful to Labour, who the hell would you pick out of? I mean, honestly, who would you pick that would be? You know, the leader has to have some form of, unless you're a National Party leader, Labour Party leader seems to have to be charismatic on some level, mind you. Helen Clark, maybe not, but certainly if you're going down the list. Kelvin Davis, Grant Robertson, Megan Woods, Chris Hipkins, Carmel Sepuloni, Andrew Little, David Parker, Denai Mahuta, Poto Williams, Damien O'Connor, Stuart. I mean, really, who out of them, as the article said, is Ardern's Ardern? Should Ardern decide to bail? Who's there? Who would it be? I mean,
Seriously,
I honestly
none
can't
of
think
them.
of anybody.
No, I think the whole thing is, I mean, we just have to look to the, you know, the UK to see that this is silly talk. changing leaders before an election.
Look, actually,
silly. I
Nick has
can't
said something.
see an orchestrated leadership coup. I can't see why it would be a calculated PR move or whatever, or campaign move.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Nick has said something, and before we started, George, I mentioned this name to you as well. Maybe Kieran McNulty. I mean, he's someone possibly in the future. You know, he's got some credentials about being rural. Although I believe, as Chewy likes to point out, he identifies himself as a socialist, which probably won't help necessarily the messaging. I don't know. But
yeah. I mean, whoever it is, we don't want them now, and we don't. I mean, I don't care much for Labor, but Labor, you don't want them now. You don't want them after they lose the election next year. You want some placeholder people that are going to be fucking useless and be a bit shit for a bit until next election. To tell you the truth, just in a sort of total, like, I don't know, elections as sports kind of comment there.
Well, I mean, that's what I was about to say. Unfortunately, I always go to sporting analogies, and it's like, you know, when you lose Dan Carter and Richie McCaw, you lose these two amazing All Blacks, and there's no one to come up underneath you, then you're fucked for a few years. Maybe actually after Ardern, Labor's just going to be fucked for a few years, because who is it? Don't know. Maybe it's no one. But I think I've had this conversation on this show in the last couple of weeks. I do believe that there is a good sector of the population who will vote for the Prime Minister. In other words, we always say, oh, we don't vote for a president here, we vote for a party. And it's like, no, because as goes the Prime Minister, so goes the party. So people voted for John Key, they voted for Helen Clark, they voted for Jacinda Ardern over above voting for Labor. So I think that we look to the leaders, and even though we don't have a presidential run, we sort of, on some level, many people treat it as that, and they vote for the person they want to lead the country as opposed to the party they want to lead the country. In my opinion, I think that's got a part to play. The other thing is, man, I can imagine Jacinda Ardern, she's far too professional to do this, or she probably wouldn't be as petty as me, but go, you know, fuck you guys, I'm out of here. I can imagine she may want to bail. Like, I can imagine someone being absolutely sick and tired of all this bullshit, but I can't see a path forward for anyone else in Labor. Like, so if she was to bail, I can imagine bailing because she wanted to. I can't imagine her bailing because it was the best decision for Labor. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess when, I mean, the media fell in love pretty fast, but just before she became leader, you know, there was it didn't seem feasible, I'm sure, to a lot of people. You know, it might have seemed a bit of a stretch, but in the end, it was a genius decision.
Yeah.
So maybe it's hard to find, and as someone said, maybe the next Labor Prime Minister isn't on that list you're showing.
The other thing is, I think maybe Hamilton West will be an interesting little pre-election poll, you know, because if National romps in, then National will use that narrative to see the country's ready for a change. If Labor romps in, then Labor will use it as a narrative for, you know, steady hands, on we go sort of thing. And if something crazy happens, like Gaurav Sharma gets in, then fucking voices for victory will be going, or voices for freedom, whatever they're called, will be going, yes, finally. Barry Soper, political editor Barry Soper, was asked about the Prime Minister, you know, quitting, and this is what he had to say.
Well, I guess that's the $64,000 question, isn't it? That there has been a lot of chatter. There's no doubt about that, and that's been going on for some months now. You will have heard it. I've certainly heard it. You know, the enthusiasm of the Prime Minister isn't quite what it used to be. You only have to look at her body language to see that. But look, I went back over a few interviews she did some years ago. She never wanted to be the Prime Minister. She said that she's seen how hard it is to raise a family in that role. And that was an interview she did in 2014. A year later, she was stating it more bluntly. She said she didn't want to be Prime Minister. Whether that, of course, was simply a party line or a firmly held personal one, is another matter. But look, the thing is, I remember when I interviewed her at the end of last year, she, like John Key, in fairness, said that she likes to be liked. Labor's got its annual conference occurring next month, and if there's going to be any leadership change, if she decides that she doesn't want to face another election, which doesn't look that good for Labor, then she may well decide that the next conference before that maybe could be the time to do it.
So, Simon says Barry's a total moron, and that might be the case, but he's also certainly in and around that world. Hears the chatter, has good contacts, and, he's been around the block for a long time in those political worlds. And I think what I hear him saying as well is if she decides to go, maybe next month is a good time to do it at the party conference. But then again, I kind of feel like, I guess, if you're a Labor voter, you'll be wanting her not to go, because then who? What that does also is gives the other thing about that Travat article, which I didn't read out, was it was also talking about a snap election. And the reason there won't be a snap election, there's lots of reasons for that. One is because Labor's doing poorly at the moment in the polls, but also is because the longer you lead it to go up until the next election, the more chance you've got for Christopher Luxon to balls it up. We all remember, either if we were there or you'll hear the stories about the Don Brash Orewa speech, where he jumped to like 40% in the polls, and then over the following 18 months, slope, drop, and then Labor won that, election 14 or 15 months after he made that speech. So that's the other thing, is that National has more of a chance to implode, which is another reason there won't be a snap election. Do you want to say anything to that, George, before I play a little bit of Rachel Smalley?
No, I think I don't know. Maybe it is a bit more feasible than I thought. I suddenly thought, she has to, like you're sort of hinting at, she has to reckon that, fuck, if I win, I have to do this for another term. Like,
well, no, well, not necessarily, because that's unfortunately one of the things I disagree with in our system, is that if she wins, she can resign the day after.
Yeah,
if she wanted to.
Yeah. And destroy her legacy, but you know what I mean. As for Hamilton West, I reckon more than 50% of the vote for the Blues, for the blue team. That's my bet, chucking it in there.
All right.
Plus 50.
I'm still going with Labor, but the reason I'm going with Labor is I think that Gaurav Sharma will split the right vote a little bit, the centre right vote. I'm very much not putting any wager on them, because I don't have a clue really. Just finally, this is just to wrap up the kind of chatter that's been going around. This is what Rachel Smalley was talking about the other day, to do with why she says, her piece is, it's not about if Jacinda Ardern will stand, it's about when she'll stand down.
I don't think Jacinda Ardern will seek a third term as Prime Minister. I wrote a column late last week for NBR and gave the reasons why I believe she'll stand down as leader before the next election. She could stand down possibly as early as Christmas. And over the weekend, my phone exploded. People wanted to know if I had the inside word. What did I know? Did I get a leak from within the beehive? No, none of those things. However, it makes sense. And here's why I think Ardern won't seek a third term as PM. In November last year, at the Labour Party conference, they pushed through a remit that means you no longer need a party-wide election process to appoint a new leader. All it takes is 2/3 of the caucus to agree to the new leader, and it's a thing, done. So less than a year ago, Labour made it easy to replace Jacinda Ardern. Also, Labour is tanking in the polls, and if the party does win next year, it won't be with a majority. They'll have to bring the Greens, Te Pāti Māori, and possibly New Zealand First into a coalition to get across the line. And that is just a shambles. Ardern knows that. It would be paralysis by analysis. New Zealand First will block everything unless it involves more free stuff for boomers. Te Pāti Māori will quickly realise life was a whole lot easier in a coalition with the Nats and ACT. And the Greens won't agree to anything unless Labour throws in a free cycle way and agrees to shoot dead around another, 200 dairy cars probably.
So that's, we'll leave it there. That's basically saying that Jacinda won't want to be Prime Minister again, so she'll leave because she doesn't want to do it, as opposed to necessarily it being the best thing for the party. That someone leaving because they don't want to do it, they don't have the heart for it, or they can't be asked, I get that. I don't think, as you say, there won't be a coup or a voting out, or I don't think it'll necessarily be best for that party for her to leave. So I guess we'll now just wait and see. But yeah, so that's the talk going around at the moment. Will Jacinda be off and be out of here?
Cool,
all right.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at this last story, George, that you're gonna troll
just
for us.
I guess with the time we have left, a little opportunity just to big up these 4 Uber drivers who have taken Uber to employment court, and the employment court has found that they are in fact employees rather than independent contractors. This has been a big deal around the world. UK Supreme Court ruled that all Uber drivers are employees about a year ago, I think. And this just affects these 4 employees here in New Zealand, but definitely could be a bit of precedent. So I guess we'll just use some One News coverage here just to fill in some context.
We're basically controlled by Uber, and we don't really have much of a say.
That could soon change. Today, the employment court ruled Bill and 3 of his fellow drivers were in an employment relationship with Uber because of the codependency between them.
Drivers are already integrated into Uber. They're helping Uber run its business. All they can do is work more or less hours in order to receive an income. Otherwise, they don't have much control.
The win could give them greater rights, such as minimum wage and annual leave.
Well, this is for all Uber drivers in New Zealand, so we're all getting together, so it's going to help everybody, not just myself.
First Union's hopeful the ruling will open up doors for other Uber drivers and workers in the wider gig economy.
It's really strong that we've targeted Uber to begin with, and considering all of the other companies that came after Uber use exactly the same model, I think it's fair to say that the court has essentially said that these are employment relationships.
This employment lawyer says there's a growing recognition that how we work is changing.
It might not be quite the same as traditional employment, but we still need some of those same types of protections.
It's an area.
The minister basically says we're looking at it, but yeah, I mean, definitely there. I mean, as you heard from them, a step in a direction of regulation and legislation, etc., keeping up with this con of platform capitalism, basically, that we just come in and facilitate. There's not an employer-employee relation, when in fact that's bullshit, as the UK Supreme Court has found, as this employment court has found. And again, a good sign, because I mean these are hugely influential organizations like Uber. There was a leak, I think it was a year ago as well, around a year ago, there was a huge leak of internal documents from Uber, and their comms people and their lobby people, have friends in very high places. There's ex-Obama administration people in Uber, that sort of thing. They've got their friends in high places. So
let me share this. So this says the Uber files are a trove of more than 124,000 records, including 82,000 emails and 1,000 other files involving conversations spanning 2013 to 2017. They were linked to The Guardian and shared with the international consortium of investigative journalists and a number of media organizations, including the BBC. They reveal for the first time how a $90 million a year lobbying and public relations effort recruited friendly politicians to help in its campaign to disrupt Europe's taxi industry. So that's I guess what you're talking about when it happened.
Yeah, so there's that aspect, like fighting back against the immense political, or fighting back against an organization that does have immense political cachet. But yeah, there's also just that increased protection for Uber drivers, for hopefully in the future people in these gig economy roles, which totally rely on. In an employer-employee relationship, totally rely on the labour. As Politikiwi says, is a good sort of story to end on for after Labour weekend.
Yep, worker status means easier ways to unionise. Rising tide lifts all ships. Yeah, look, I think it's really interesting, and I think that having been someone who's both been a business owner, an employee, and a contractor, let's be honest, every version has its pros and every version has its cons. But I think mostly the law says, and also someone who's investigated internships as well, mostly the law says if you're being used as an employee, then you're an employee. Like if you're being used as there's different, you use the working hours of someone to be an employee differently from to be a contractor. And what some companies are doing, and I guess without too much knowledge, I'm guessing this is what the courts have ruled, is that Uber is using the hours of their drivers more like employees than contractors, hence they're employees.
Yeah, and yeah, sort of the technical function of how the app works in terms of how they're controlled and directed, yeah, it was like an employer-employee relationship, except for the fact that they don't have the protections, and most likely, getting paid under minimum wage, as is usually the case when a company seems very set on having you as an independent contractor rather than a wage person.
So some texts that have been coming in about this through the show. Uber currently operates at a loss. Its business model is to destroy the taxi industry with low fares. Once then, they will raise their prices to the same level as before. The workers are treated as contractors and are not given the normal rights as employees. This increases the profit for Uber whilst they continue to pay out a pittance.
It's really it's interesting because they, like Netflix as well, they operate on a loss, but they're valued at gazillion dollars, and that value relies on this quality controlled brand that is stitched together by its employees.
All right. Hey, I think we're rocking and rolling. Oh shit, I'm dropping my pen. We're pretty much done for tonight. Let me just say, Simon was putting a message in here about the previous topic. New Zealand, not convinced New Zealand first will even exist. Top chances are looking better, says Simon. I guess that could be the truth. Want to say as well, thank you for joining us on Saturday morning. If you joined us as a part of our patrons, our very first patrons catch up, we're going to put a desire out there to reach 50 patrons by Christmas. So if you have enjoyed what you've seen tonight, if you would like to support independent media, then please consider going to patreon.com/Big Hairy News and becoming a patron, and we'll see what we can do about making it to basically doubling our numbers to make it to 50 by Christmas. And as you can see on the bottom of the screen, if you're watching right now, thank you to our $50 patrons, which is a part of the level. You get a credit in the show. So there's Kooky Nick and there's Alex. Enjoy having all of you on board, but that's a part of the $50 package, as you get to be credited during the show. So there they are, being credited during the show. And if you want to come on board, patreon.com/Big Hairy News. There's a ton of more messages that have been going in. What will BHN do if you reach 50? Some sort of Patreon reward? Yep. I think we'll do a show.
I'll start doing movie reviews.
We'll do a show naked. I think that's what we'll do. We'll do one naked. Gareth was there on Saturday morning. Good chat on Saturday. We averaged our beard game was yeah, there was more beards than not there, which it's not an essential part of it, but it was obvious on Saturday morning. And as I said, if you watched us on Saturday morning, if you were there, then if you record it locally, sometimes everyone records their own Zooms, then let me know, because my Zoom did not record, and I would like to put it up on Patreon for others to see. All right, George. I think we're done. Thank you, sir.
Paul mentioned F1, and so I just got to show my Lewis Hamilton t-shirt. There we go. Not that I'm a big stan or anything. I just sort of like the t-shirt, but soon he'll get that win. Soon.
Yeah, very good.
I mean, he's got 100 others, so it's all right.
And we'll be back tomorrow night from 10 p.m. for another edition of Big Hairy News. Stay safe, everybody out there, and we will catch you tomorrow. Good to talk to you. Thanks for the chats. Thanks for the the chats was great. So I actually appreciate all your input and your insights, and we'll see you tomorrow from 10. Hooroo.